They thought she was just a waitress, a nobody wiping tables at New York's most exclusive Mafia front, La Veta. Then walked in Lorenzo Moretti, the capo of the 5 families, a man who hadn't smiled since 1999. He looked at her, laughed, and told his consigliere in a rare, dead Sicilian dialect that she was trash fit only for the rats. He thought she was deaf to his world. He was wrong. She didn't just understand him. She replied in the dialect of his own village, a language dead to everyone but the ghosts of Sicily. The room didn't just go silent, it stopped breathing. The waitress wasn't a nobody. She was the weapon he never saw coming. Sophie adjusted the collar of her black uniform, the fabric scratching against her neck. The air in La Veta always smelled the same: truffle oil, expensive cologne, and fear. It was a peculiar scent, specific to this corner of Tribeca where the cars parked outside cost more than most houses in the Midwest. She checked her reflection in the polished brass of the espresso machine. Brown hair pulled back tight, minimal makeup, eyes kept low. The goal was invisibility. For 3 years, Sophie had perfected the art of being furniture. She wasn't Sophie the woman. She was Sophie the hand that poured the Chianti, the shadow that cleared the plates. "Table 4 is open," the maitre d', Marco, hissed as he passed her. "And fix your apron. He's coming tonight." Sophie didn't have to ask who he was. The whole restaurant had been vibrating with nervous energy since noon. Lorenzo Moretti. The press called him a logistics consultant. The FBI called him the Teflon Don. The streets just called him Il Lupo, the wolf. Sophie felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew the face. Everyone did. But for her, the name Moretti carried a different weight. It was a name etched into the tombstones of a past she had buried under a fake social security number and a cheap apartment in Queens. "I'll take the back section," Sophie whispered, trying to trade shifts with Gianna, a younger waitress who viewed the mobsters with a mix of terror and arousal. "No chance," Marco snapped, overhearing her. "Gianna shakes when she pours the soup. You have ice in your veins, Sophie. You take the VIP table. Don't embarrass me, or you're out on the street." She nodded, gripping her tray until her knuckles turned white. She had spent a decade running from this world, running from the heritage that stained her hands red before she was even born. And now, she had to serve wine to the man who currently sat on the throne, built on bones. The heavy oak doors swung open. The ambient jazz music didn't stop, but the conversation did. Lorenzo entered. He was taller than he looked in the surveillance photos Sophie used to study in her former life. He wore a charcoal suit cut so sharply it looked like it could draw blood. He didn't look around the room. He didn't have to. He owned the space the moment his shoe touched the marble floor. Flanking him were his lieutenants, Matteo, a brute with a scar running through his eyebrow, and Silvio, the consigliere, an older man with eyes like a shark. They moved to table 4, the booth in the corner with the best sightlines of the exits. Sophie took a breath. "Just a waitress," she repeated mentally. "Just a ghost." She approached the table with the water pitcher. Her movements were precise, practiced. She poured the water without a splash, placing the glasses down with a velvet touch. Lorenzo didn't look up. He was busy scanning the menu, though everyone knew he would order the osso buco without looking. "Good evening, gentlemen," Sophie said, her voice a flat American monotone. "Can I start you with something from the bar?" Lorenzo waved a hand dismissively, not deigning to speak to the help. Silvio, the older man, looked up. "The 96 Barolo. Open it an hour before you pour, and bring the antipasti immediately." "Of course." She turned to leave, and that was when it happened. She felt Lorenzo's eyes on her. It wasn't a look of attraction. It was the look of a predator sensing movement in the brush. "Wait," Lorenzo said. His voice was gravel and silk. Sophie froze, her back to him. She turned slowly. "Yes, sir?" He looked her up and down, his eyes analyzing everything. Her shoes, her hands, the way she stood. He was looking for a threat. He found a waitress. He scoffed, a cruel, arrogant sound. He turned to Silvio, leaning back in his chair, and switched languages. He didn't speak English, and he didn't speak standard Italian. He spoke Arborescia-influenced Sicilian, a specific, twisted dialect from the mountain villages near Palermo. It was a code as much as a language used by the old families to discuss business in front of the sbirri, cops, and the Americans. "Talia sta femmina," Lorenzo muttered to Silvio, gesturing vaguely at Sophie with his chin. "Carni di poco prezzo. Pare na mula stanca chun sapi mancu comu si tenian manu un piatto. Look at this woman. Cheap meat. She looks like a tired mule who doesn't even know how to hold a plate." Silvio chuckled, taking a sip of his water. "È una disgrazia, Enzo, ma fino a quando porta lu vino, cin ni futti." "It's a disgrace, Enzo, but as long as she brings the wine, who cares?" Lorenzo smirked, his eyes cruel. "Si fossi in Sicilia, la mitizia poliziari I cessi, e ci duca si merita." "If we were in Sicily, I'd have her cleaning the toilets. That's all she's worth." The insult was vile. It was classless. It was typical Moretti arrogance. Sophie stood there, the tray trembling slightly in her hand. Not from fear, from rage. She knew that dialect. She didn't just know it. It was the language her grandmother sang lullabies in. It was the language her father screamed in before he was gunned down in a Palermo olive grove 20 years ago. It was the language of her blood. The smart thing to do was walk away. The safe thing to do was to be the mule he thought she was. But Sophie was tired. She was tired of hiding, tired of the cheap uniform, and tired of men like Lorenzo Moretti thinking they were gods because they carried guns. The silence at the table stretched. They expected her to bow and leave. Instead, Sophie tightened her grip on the empty tray. Her posture shifted. The slouch of the tired waitress vanished, replaced by the rigid, proud spine of a woman born to a dynasty older than his. She looked Lorenzo dead in the eye. The air in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. The jazz piano in the background seemed to fade into white noise. Lorenzo was already looking away, reaching for a breadstick, dismissing her existence entirely. Sophie didn't move. "Mula stanza," she repeated softly. Lorenzo's hand froze halfway to the bread basket. It wasn't the words that stopped him. It was the accent. She didn't say it like an American tourist trying to pronounce bruschetta. She said it with the guttural, clipped rhythm of the old country. He turned his head slowly, his brow furrowed. "Excuse me," he said in English, assuming he had misheard. Sophie didn't blink. She stepped closer to the table, violating the invisible barrier of personal space that Mafia dons kept around them. She spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the noise of the dining room. But she didn't speak English. She switched effortlessly into the exact same obscure Sicilian dialect he had just used. "Tu parli di muli, Don Moretti," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Ma un ver'uomo, un insulta, ci serve lu pane. Solamente I cani abbaiano, a cui non ponnu muzzicare." "You speak of mules, Don Moretti, but a real man doesn't insult the one who serves him bread. Only dogs bark at those they cannot bite." The sound of silverware clinking at the nearby tables stopped. Silvio dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Matteo, the bodyguard, half rose from his seat, his hand diving into his jacket for a weapon. Lorenzo held up a hand to stop him, but his eyes never left Sophie's face. The arrogance was gone, wiped clean by shock. His face went pale, then flushed with a dangerous heat. "Ci sei tu," Lorenzo whispered, slipping back into the dialect. "Who are you?" Sophie tilted her head, a cold smile playing on her lips. "Sugnu cida kati porta u vinu," she replied. "I am the one who brings you the wine." She held his gaze for 3 heartbeat-long seconds, an eternity in their world, a challenge. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she reverted to the submissive waitress. "I'll go get that Barolo now," she said in flat English. Decanted. 1 hour. She turned on her heel and walked away. She could feel his eyes burning a hole between her shoulder blades. She walked through the kitchen doors, and the moment they swung shut, she collapsed against the stainless steel counter, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Sophie!" Marco shouted from the pass. "Where is the antipasti for table 4? "I'm getting it," she snapped, her hands shaking as she reached for the platter of prosciutto and melon. She had made a mistake, a massive, potentially fatal mistake. You don't humiliate a capo in front of his men. You certainly don't reveal that you speak the secret language of the inner circle. Out in the dining room, the atmosphere at table 4 had shifted from relaxed to lethal. Lorenzo stared at the kitchen doors, his knuckles white as he gripped the tablecloth. "She understood," Silvio whispered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Enzo, she understood the Arberescia. That is not Italian school. That is village. That is family." "I know what it is," Lorenzo growled. "Who is she?" Matteo asked, his eyes darting around the room. "A Fed? A wire?" "No," Lorenzo said, his mind racing. "Feds learn Italian at Quantico. They sound like textbooks. She sounded like my grandmother." He looked down at his hands. He had insulted her, called her trash, and she had dressed him down with more dignity than his own captains possessed. "Find out," Lorenzo commanded, his voice low. "Boss, we can just grab her after the shift," Matteo suggested. "No," Lorenzo snapped. "We are in public, and I want to know who sent her. You don't find a girl like that serving pasta in Tribeca by accident. Someone planted her here. Maybe the Russos. Maybe the Triad. Or maybe," Silvio said quietly, "she is just a ghost." Lorenzo stood up. "I'm not hungry." "Boss?" I said, "I'm not hungry. Leave $1,000 on the table. We're leaving." "But the girl—" "I will handle the girl," Lorenzo said, buttoning his jacket. "Personally." Sophie peeked through the small circular window of the kitchen door, just in time to see Lorenzo Moretti striding toward the exit. But before he reached the door, he stopped. He turned around, looking straight at the kitchen window. He couldn't see her through the glass, but he knew she was there. He raised 2 fingers to his eyes, then pointed at the door. "I'm watching you." Sophie shrank back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had wanted to sting his ego. Instead, she had just invited the wolf into her house. The shift ended at 2:00 a.m. Sophie spent the rest of the night jumping at shadows. Every time a customer raised their voice, she thought it was a hit squad. She changed out of her uniform quickly, pulling on a baggy grey hoodie and jeans. She exited through the back alley, the smell of wet cardboard and garbage greeting her. This was the unglamorous reality of New York. She walked fast, head down, keys laced between her fingers, a habit from living on the run. She made it 2 blocks down Varick Street when she saw it. A black Cadillac Escalade, idling at the curb. The engine was purring, the windows tinted so dark they looked like oil slicks. Sophie stopped. She turned to go the other way, but a second car, a sleek Maserati, pulled out from a side street, blocking her retreat. She was trapped. The rear door of the Escalade opened. It wasn't Matteo or a goon who stepped out. It was Lorenzo. He was alone. He leaned against the doorframe, lighting a cigarette. The flame illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He looked different out here in the streetlights, less like a king, more like a street fighter in an expensive suit. "You walk fast," he said. Sophie didn't reply. She calculated the distance to the subway entrance. 50 yards. Too far. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, taking a drag. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it past the dumpster." "What do you want?" Sophie asked, her voice steady. "Answers," Lorenzo said. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his polished shoe. "You embarrassed me tonight, Sophie. That's the name on the tag, right?" "Sophie. It's a common name. And speaking the dialect of the Corleone Mountains? Is that common?" He took a step toward her. "I looked into you while I waited. Sophie Miller. Social Security number issued in Ohio. High school in Dayton. No passport. No family." He stopped 3 feet from her. He smelled of tobacco and danger. "Paper," he whispered. "You are made of paper, Sophie. Your whole life is a lie typed up by someone very good at forging documents. Who are you, really?" "I'm a waitress who wants to go home," she said. "Liar." Lorenzo reached out. For a second, Sophie thought he was going to strike her. Her body reacted on instinct. Muscle memory from training she hadn't used in years kicked in. As his hand came toward her shoulder, she didn't flinch. She slapped his wrist away with her left hand, stepped into his guard, and drove her right elbow toward his ribs. It was a blur of motion. Lorenzo, to his credit, was fast. He blocked the elbow, but the force of it knocked the wind out of him. He stumbled back, looking at her with wide eyes. Sophie stood in a combat stance, her center of gravity low, her hands up. "Ohio girls don't fight like Krav Maga instructors," Lorenzo wheezed, a smirk slowly returning to his face. He didn't look angry, he looked delighted. "Stay away from me, Moretti," Sophie warned. "You hit a maid man." Lorenzo laughed darkly. "Do you know the penalty for that?" "Death," she said. "I know the rules." "You know the rules," he repeated. He straightened his jacket. "You speak the language, you fight like a soldier, and you hide like a spy." He walked closer again, slower this time, hands raised in surrender. "I have a problem, Sophie. I have enemies surrounding me. I have rats in my organization. And tonight, I found the only person in New York who isn't afraid of me." He reached into his pocket. Sophie tensed, ready to strike again. He pulled out a card. It was black, with a single gold phone number embossed on it. "I don't need a waitress," Lorenzo said softly. "I need someone who can see the knives coming before I do. Someone who understands the old ways." He tucked the card into the pocket of her hoodie. "Call me, or don't. But if the Russos find out who you really are before I do, you'll wish you were with me." He got back into the Escalade. The door slammed shut. The tires squealed as the car sped off into the night, leaving Sophie standing alone under the flickering street lamp. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the card. Her hands were shaking again. The Russos. He had mentioned the Russos. Sophie closed her eyes. If the Russos were in town, her cover wasn't just blown, it was incinerated. The Russos were the ones who killed her father. She looked at the black card. Lorenzo Moretti was a monster. But he might be the only shield she had left against the devils from her past. Sophie didn't go straight home. She took the Q train 3 stops past her station, doubled back on a bus, and walked the final mile through the winding streets of Queens. It was 3:30 a.m. when she finally stood in front of her apartment building, a crumbling brick walk-up that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. She paused at the front door. Something was wrong. It was a small thing, a detail most people would miss. She had placed a small piece of clear Scotch tape on the bottom corner of the doorframe before leaving for work. It was an old trick, one her father had taught her when she was 12. Trust God, Sophia, but verify everyone else. The tape was broken. Her breath hitched. Someone was inside. She backed away slowly, moving into the shadows of the alleyway. Her mind raced. Was it Lorenzo? Had he ignored his own promise and sent his goons to drag her in? No. Lorenzo was arrogant, but he wasn't sloppy. If Lorenzo wanted her, he would have taken her on the street. This felt different. This felt clumsy. This felt like the Russos. She had two choices: run and leave everything behind, her cash stash, her fake passports, the only photo she had of her mother, or go in and fight. Sophie touched the pocket of her hoodie. She had a box cutter from the restaurant and a small canister of pepper spray. Not exactly an arsenal against Mafia hitmen. Then she remembered the black card. She pulled it out. The gold numbers shimmered in the faint light. Call me. She dialed the number. It rang once. Talk, Lorenzo's voice answered. He sounded wide awake. Someone is in my apartment, Sophie whispered, pressing her back against the brick wall. There was a pause. The line crackled with static. Where are you? Outside. Queens, 42nd Street. Are you safe? For the next 30 seconds. After that, I don't know. Stay hidden, Lorenzo commanded. Do not go inside. Do not engage. I have a car 2 blocks away watching you. Sophie froze. You had me followed. I told you, Sophie. I'm a logistical consultant. I protect my investments. Get to the corner of Broadway, a grey sedan. The code word is Omerta. Go. The line went dead. Sophie didn't have time to be angry about the surveillance. The front door of her building opened. 2 men stepped out. They were big, wearing leather jackets that bulged at the waistlines. They weren't Italians. They were Eastern European. The Russos used Albanian muscle. One of them checked his phone. She's not in there. The place is empty. Find her, the other growled. Don said, bring her head. Sophie's blood turned to ice. Bring her head. This wasn't a recruitment drive. It was an execution. She slipped deeper into the alley, navigating the maze of trash cans with silent feet. She reached the corner of Broadway just as the grey sedan pulled up. The window rolled down an inch. Code? The driver asked. He looked like an ex-Marine. Omerta, Sophie said, diving into the back seat as the door unlocked. Go, she yelled. The tires screeched as the car peeled away, just as the 2 Albanians rounded the corner, guns drawn. They fired 2 shots, shattering the rear tail light, but the sedan was already weaving through traffic, disappearing into the city night. Sophie slumped back against the leather seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was alive. But Sophie Miller, the waitress, was dead. Her apartment was compromised. Her identity was burned. The car didn't stop until it reached a private underground garage in Midtown Manhattan. The elevator took her up 50 floors to the penthouse of the St. Regis. The doors opened directly into a living room that cost more than her entire lifetime's earnings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sparkling grid of New York City. Lorenzo stood by the fireplace, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid. He had changed out of his suit into a black silk shirt and slacks. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. You have a pest problem, Lorenzo said, turning to face her. Albanians? Russos, Sophie corrected, stepping into the room. She felt dirty and small in this palace of glass and gold. They hired the Albanians. The Russos, Lorenzo mused, swirling his drink. They are pushing into my territory in the meat-packing district. Aggressive. Stupid. He looked at her. Why do they want a waitress dead, Sophie? Sophie walked over to the window, looking out at the city that wanted to swallow her whole, because my name isn't Sophie Miller. I know, Lorenzo said softly. I made a few calls while you were in transit. He placed a folder on the glass coffee table. You are Sofia Rossi, he said, daughter of Giacomo Rossi, the Don of Palermo, the man who controlled the olive oil trade for 30 years until he was assassinated in 2005. Sophie flinched. Hearing her real name spoken aloud felt like a physical blow. They killed him, she whispered. The Russos. They wanted his shipping routes. They killed him, my mother, my brothers. I was away at boarding school in Switzerland. I was the only one left. And you've been running ever since, Lorenzo finished. Waitressing, scrubbing floors, hiding from ghosts. I'm not hiding anymore, Sophie said, turning to him. Her eyes were dry. They found me. I have nowhere left to go. Lorenzo walked over to her. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. You do have somewhere, he said. The Rossi family was an ally to the Morettis in the old days. Your father and my grandfather broke bread together. He extended his hand. Work for me, Sophia. Not as a waitress. Be my eyes. Be my ears. You speak the dialects. You know the customs. You have the blood. My organization is full of snakes, and I need a mongoose. And what do I get? Sophie asked, looking at his hand. You get protection, Lorenzo vowed. You get money. And when the time is right, you get the Russos. Sophie looked at his hand, then up at his face. The Wolf of New York was offering her a deal with the devil. But right now, the devil was the only one with a sword big enough to defend her. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and dangerous. Deal, she said. The transformation took 3 days. Lorenzo didn't just give her a job. He gave her a new skin. The cheap polyester uniforms and baggy hoodies were replaced by tailored blazers, silk blouses, and stilettos that looked like weapons. He moved her into a secure apartment in his building, 3 floors below his own. But the real change was internal. Sophie, now going by Sophia within the inner circle, had to relearn how to be a predator. Her first test came on a Tuesday night, a sit-down with the Calabresi family at a private warehouse in the Navy Yard. Stay close, Lorenzo told her as they adjusted their earpieces in the back of the SUV. Don't speak unless I ask you to. Just listen. Listen to what they say, and more importantly, what they don't say. Who are we meeting? Vincent the Butcher. Vargo, Lorenzo said, checking his pistol. He claims he wants peace. He says he didn't know the Russos were moving in. Do you believe him? I believe everyone is a liar until they are dead, Lorenzo replied. They entered the warehouse. It was cold, smelling of rust and sea salt. Vargo was waiting at a metal table, surrounded by 4 guards. He was a fat man, with grease stains on his shirt, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lorenzo sat opposite him. Silvio stood to his right. Sophia stood to his left, holding a briefcase that supposedly contained contracts, but actually contained a loaded Glock 19 and a tracking device. The meeting started cordially. They spoke in standard Italian. Vargo apologized for the recent friction. He offered Lorenzo a percentage of his construction unions as a peace offering. I have no love for the Russos, Vargo said, spreading his hands. They are animals, no respect for tradition. You and I, Lorenzo, we are men of honor. Lorenzo nodded, seemingly appeased. The construction deal is generous, Vincent. I accept. The tension in the room dissipated. Silvio relaxed his shoulders, but Sophia felt a prickle on the back of her neck. She was watching Vargo's consigliere, a thin man named Paolo, who stood in the shadows. While Vargo spoke Italian, Paolo was whispering into his phone. He wasn't speaking Italian. He was speaking Arberesha. Sofia tuned her ears, filtering out the warehouse echo. I pisci sunnu nariti, Paolo whispered. The fish are in the net. Sofia's eyes widened. It was a trap. She didn't wait for permission. She stepped forward, placing her hand on Lorenzo's shoulder, a massive breach of protocol. Boss, she said in English, her voice sharp. We need to leave. Now. Vargo's smile vanished. Excuse me? Who is the skirt? Shut up, Lorenzo snapped at Vargo, then looked at Sofia. Why? Paolo, she said, pointing at the man in the shadows. He just gave the signal. The fish are in the net. They aren't alone here. Vargo's face turned purple. She's lying. She's crazy. Lorenzo looked at Sofia. He saw the certainty in her eyes. He didn't hesitate. He kicked the table over, flipping the heavy metal surface to create a shield just as the skylights above them shattered. Men rappelled down from the rafters on ropes, submachine guns blazing. Ambush! Silvio screamed, returning fire. Go! Lorenzo grabbed Sofia's arm, dragging her behind a stack of shipping crates. Bullets chewed up the concrete where they had been standing a second ago. How did you know? Lorenzo shouted over the roar of gunfire. He spoke the dialect, Sofia yelled back, pulling her Glock from the briefcase. They sold you out to the Russos. They were pinned down. Vargo's men were closing in from the front, and the rappel team was flanking them from above. Silvio is hit, Matteo yelled from across the room. The older consigliere was clutching his leg, blood pooling on the floor. Lorenzo looked at his mentor, then at the exit, 50 yards away through a hail of bullets. He looked trapped. For the first time, the wolf looked cornered. Sofia saw it. She saw the hesitation. Cover me, she said. What? No! Lorenzo grabbed her. You are an analyst, not a soldier. I am a Rossi, she snarled, shaking off his grip. And nobody kills my boss on the first week. She didn't wait. She broke cover, sprinting laterally across the open space. She wasn't just running. She was drawing fire. The gunmen up in the rafters turned their aim toward the woman in the high heels, running like an Olympian. Sofia slid across the floor, taking cover behind a forklift. She took a breath, popped up, and fired 3 times. Her aim was true. 2 of the men in the rafters fell, their bodies hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. The distraction worked. Lorenzo and Matteo dragged Silvio toward the exit, firing suppressive rounds. Sofia rejoined them at the heavy iron door. Lorenzo kicked it open, and they spilled out into the rainy night where their convoy was waiting. They piled into the SUV, tires screaming as they sped away from the ambush. Inside the car, silence reigned for a full minute, broken only by Silvio's groans of pain. Lorenzo looked at Sofia. Her hair was a mess, her blazer was torn, and she had a smear of grease on her cheek. She was reloading her magazine with calm, steady hands. He had never seen anything so beautiful in his life. You saved us, Lorenzo said, his voice filled with awe. I did my job, Sofia replied, clicking the magazine into place. You killed 2 men, Lorenzo noted. Self-defense. Lorenzo reached out and wiped the grease from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence they had just escaped. You are not just a Rossi, he whispered. You are dangerous. Is that a problem? She challenged, looking into his dark eyes. Lorenzo leaned in, his face inches from hers. The adrenaline was still pumping through both of them, creating an electric, magnetic field. No, he murmured. It's exactly what I've been waiting for. For a moment, it looked like he was going to kiss her. The air between them crackled with unspoken desire, a mix of fear and attraction that was more potent than any drug. Then, his phone rang. Lorenzo pulled back, breaking the spell. He answered it, his face hardening into stone. What? He barked. He listened for a moment, then lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Sophia, but the warmth was gone. It was replaced by a look of profound betrayal. "Driver," Lorenzo said coldly, "stop the car." "What's wrong?" Sophia asked, sensing the shift. "That was my contact at the FBI," Lorenzo said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He just ran the ballistics on the gun found in Vargo's warehouse, the one his men used." And it matches the gun used to kill my brother 3 years ago." Lorenzo turned to Sophia, his eyes like ice. "The gun belongs to the Rossi family, Sophia, your father's family." Sophia froze. "That's impossible. My father has been dead for 20 years. Our weapons were destroyed." "Were they?" Lorenzo asked. "Or have you been lying to me this whole time? Are you here to help me, Sophia? Or are you here to finish what your father started?" The car pulled over to the side of the rain-slicked highway. "Get out!" Lorenzo said. "Lorenzo, listen to me." "I said get out!" he roared, his hand reaching for his weapon. "Before I forget that you saved my life 5 minutes ago." Sophia looked at him, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. He was wrong. Someone was framing her family, framing her, but the wolf was wounded, and he wasn't listening to reason. She opened the door and stepped out into the pouring rain. The SUV sped off, leaving her stranded on the side of the highway, alone once again. But this time, she wasn't just a waitress running from the past. She was a soldier in a war she hadn't started, and she was going to finish it. Sophia walked for 3 miles in the rain until she found a truck-stop diner. She sat in the back booth, shivering, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. She ordered a black coffee and stared into the dark liquid. Lorenzo thought she was a traitor. The Russos wanted her dead. Vargo knew her face. She was checkmated. But Sophia Rossi had one advantage. Nobody knew she existed. Not really. To Lorenzo, she was a confusing variable. To the Russos, she was a loose end. But to herself, she was the daughter of the Olive Prince. She needed to find out who planted that gun. Who was orchestrating this war between the Morettis and the ghost of the Rossis? She reached into her bra and pulled out a small, waterproof flash drive. She had stolen it from Vargo's office during the chaos of the gunfight. While everyone was shooting, Sophia had been swiping data. She pulled a cracked smartphone from her pocket, a burner she kept for emergencies, and plugged the drive in. She scrolled through the encrypted files, spreadsheets, payoffs, shipping manifests, and then she saw it. A transfer order. Project Lazarus, supply drop. Recipient, Matteo Giordano. Sophia stopped breathing. Matteo, Lorenzo's right-hand man, the brute with the scar. Matteo was on Vargo's payroll. Matteo had planted the gun. Matteo had set up the ambush. Lorenzo wasn't being betrayed by the Rossi ghosts. He was being betrayed by the man standing right next to him. Sophia checked the timestamp on the file. There was a meeting scheduled for tonight, midnight, at La Vetta, the restaurant where this all began. Matteo was going to hand over Lorenzo to the Russos tonight. The ambush at the warehouse was just a show to separate Lorenzo from his loyal men, to make him paranoid, to isolate him. And she had just been kicked out of the car. Lorenzo was alone with Matteo. Sophia looked at the clock on the wall. 11:15 p.m. She had 45 minutes to get back to Tribeca. She had no car, no backup, and only 6 bullets left in her magazine. She ran out to the parking lot. A trucker was climbing into his rig. "Hey!" she shouted, waving a $100 bill she had stashed in her shoe. "I need a ride to the city. Fast!" The trucker looked at the wet, desperate woman with the fierce eyes. "Hop in, lady." The ride took 30 minutes. Sophia spent every second cleaning her gun and praying to saints she hadn't believed in for years. The truck dropped her off 2 blocks from La Vetta. The streets were quiet. The restaurant was supposedly closed, but the lights were dim inside. Sophia crept to the back alley, the same one where Lorenzo had first confronted her. She peeked through the dirty window. The main dining room was set for a private dinner, but there was no food. Lorenzo was tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bloody. He had been beaten. Standing over him was Matteo, holding a baseball bat. And sitting at table 4, Lorenzo's table, was a man Sophia recognized from her nightmares. Victor Russo, the man who pulled the trigger on her father. "You're losing your touch, Lorenzo," Russo laughed, cutting a piece of steak. "You let a girl distract you. You let your guard down." "She had nothing to do with this," Lorenzo spat, blood dripping from his lip. "She's gone." "Is she?" Matteo sneered. "Or maybe she was working for me all along. Maybe she was the one who led you into the warehouse?" "Don't you speak her name," Lorenzo growled. Even now, tied up and beaten, he defended her. Sophia felt a pang in her chest. He hadn't totally turned on her. He was confused, hurt, but he still protected her. "It doesn't matter," Russo said, wiping his mouth. "Sign the transfer papers for the waterfront, Lorenzo, and I'll make it quick. Refuse, and I'll let Matteo practice his swing." Lorenzo looked up, his eyes defiant. "Go to hell." Matteo raised the bat. Sophia knew she couldn't take them all. There were 4 guards by the door, plus Matteo and Russo. 6 men. 6 bullets. She needed a distraction. She needed a miracle. She looked around the kitchen, the gas line. The stoves were industrial grade. If she severed the line and created a spark, it was suicide. But it was the only way to save him. Sophia kicked the back door open. She didn't sneak in this time. She walked in loud. "Hey!" she screamed. Every head in the room turned. Matteo lowered the bat. Russo squinted. "Who the hell is this?" "I'm the waitress," Sophia said, walking into the dining room. She held her gun down by her side, looking non-threatening. "Sophia, run!" Lorenzo shouted, straining against his ropes. "I tried running," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "I didn't like it." "Kill her," Russo commanded casually. 2 guards raised their guns. "Wait," Sophia yelled. "I have the drive. The encryption key for Lorenzo's offshore accounts. You want the money, right? It's all here." She held up the flash drive. Russo held up a hand. "Hold fire." He looked at the drive greedily. "Bring it here." Sophia walked forward, slowly. She passed the kitchen, passed through. As she did, she subtly kicked the valve on the gas range she had loosened earlier. The hiss of gas began to fill the kitchen, silent and deadly behind her. She walked up to table 4. She was 5 feet from Lorenzo. "I'm sorry, boss," she whispered to him. "Sophia, what are you doing?" Lorenzo pleaded. She looked at Matteo. "You traitorous swine." She looked at Russo. "And you murderer." "Give me the drive," Russo demanded, standing up. "Catch," Sophia said. She tossed the drive into the air. As every eye followed the small silver object arcing toward the ceiling, Sophia dropped to her knees. She didn't shoot Russo. She didn't shoot Matteo. She fired a single shot into the kitchen, aiming blindly at the metal backsplash where the sparks would fly. Boom! The kitchen exploded. A fireball erupted from the back, blowing the doors off their hinges and sending a wave of heat and debris into the dining room. The shockwave knocked everyone off their feet. The windows of La Vetta shattered outwards into the street. The sprinkler system triggered, raining water down on the burning chaos. Sophia, having anticipated the blast, was already moving. She scrambled over the broken glass to Lorenzo. "Sophia!" He coughed, his ears ringing. She pulled a knife from her boot and slashed his ropes. "Can you move?" "Yes," he groaned, standing up unsteadily. "Then fight." Matteo was staggering to his feet, his face burned, furious. He roared like a beast and charged at them. Lorenzo met him halfway. He didn't have a weapon, but he had rage. He caught Matteo's charge, driving his shoulder into the traitor's gut. They crashed into a table, rolling in the glass and water. Russo was crawling toward his gun. Sofia stepped on his hand. Crunch. Russo screamed. He looked up at her, terror in his eyes. "You," he gasped. "You look just like him." "Good," Sofia said. She raised her gun. "No," Lorenzo shouted, leaving the unconscious body of Matteo. "Sofia, don't. We need him alive. We need the codes." Sofia hesitated. Her finger was on the trigger. The man who killed her father was right there. Justice was 1 millimeter away. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were coming. "Sofia!" Lorenzo grabbed her arm. "We have to go. If you kill him, the war never ends. We take him. We make him confess. We win the right way." She looked at Lorenzo. His face was battered, his suit ruined, but he was looking at her with a desperate intensity. He wasn't ordering her as a boss. He was asking her as a partner. She lowered the gun. "Grab him," she said. Lorenzo hauled the moaning Russo up by his collar. Sofia covered the exit. They stumbled out into the cool night air, leaving the burning ruins of Lavetta behind them. They made it into the alley just as the first police cruiser screeched to a halt out front. They collapsed against the brick wall of the adjacent building, hidden in the shadows. Both of them were gasping for air, soaked, bleeding, and alive. Lorenzo looked at her. He laughed, a ragged, breathless sound. "You blew up my restaurant," he said. "The ossobuco was dry anyway," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. Lorenzo reached out and cupped her face. This time there was no phone call to interrupt them. He kissed her. It tasted of smoke and blood and rain, but it was the most real thing either of them had ever felt. "We aren't done," Lorenzo whispered against her lips. "The other families will come for us." "Let them come," Sofia said, gripping his lapel. "I speak their language now." The safe house was a decommissioned meatpacking plant in New Jersey, a cold steel tomb that smelled of rust. Victor Russo sat zip-tied to a chair in the center of the floor, bleeding from a broken nose, but still sneering. Lorenzo paced before him, while Sofia leaned against a conveyor belt, the Glock 19 resting easy in her hand. "It's over, Victor," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing. "Matteo is in the wind. My restaurant is gone. But you are here." "You can't kill me," Russo spat. "I'm a head of a family. You kill me without a commission vote, and the other 3 families will hunt you down. You'll start a war you can't win." Lorenzo stopped. He knew Russo was right. The old laws protected the Dons. "I don't need to kill you," Lorenzo said calmly. "I just need the truth. Admit you framed the Rossi family." Russo laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "I'd rather die." Sofia pushed herself off the wall. She walked slowly toward him. She didn't look angry. She looked ancient. She stopped inches from his face. "Ti ricordi di l'arboli di olivi?" she whispered. "Do you remember the olive trees?" Russo blinked, the dialect jarring him. "I remember," Sofia continued. "I was 10. You came to my father's house in Palermo. You gave me a gold coin. Then you shot him in the back in the olive grove." Russo stared, the color draining from his face. The waitress wasn't just a look-alike. She was a ghost. "Sofia," he breathed. "It was business." "It is always business," she agreed. She pulled out a burner phone. "I'm not going to kill you, Victor. That would be too easy." She dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Pronto?" A heavy, accented voice answered. It was Don Giamino, the head of the Sicilian Commission, the highest authority in their world. "Don Giamino," Sofia said, her eyes locked on Russo. "This is Sofia Rossi, daughter of Giacomo." Silence stretched on the line. Then, grave and low. "We thought you were dead, child." "I was," Sophia said, "until Victor Russo tried to finish the job tonight. I have him here. He killed a made man without sanction 20 years ago, and tonight he used explosives in a civilian establishment." Russo struggled against his ties. "Hang up! Hang up the phone!" In their world, to be condemned by Sicily was worse than death. It was erasure. "Pass the phone to Victor," the Don commanded. Sophia held the phone to Russo's ear. "Victor," the old voice crackled, "you have brought shame to the families. You are alone. Do what is honorable." The line went dead. Russo slumped, defeated. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being stripped of his name. "What do you want?" Russo whispered. "Retirement," Sophia said coldly. "Florida. You never set foot in New York again. If you do, the order from Sicily stands." Russo nodded slowly. He had been beaten, not by fists, but by bloodline. 3 days later. The meeting took place at Cafe Reggio in Greenwich Village. The heads of the remaining 3 families, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese, sat at a marble table, skeptical and tense. Lorenzo walked in, bruised but wearing a fresh suit. He stood at the head of the table. "Russo is gone," Lorenzo announced. "I have absorbed his operations." "This is aggressive, Lorenzo," the Genovese boss, Frank, said warily. "Who helped you orchestrate this coup? We hear Silvio is in the hospital." Lorenzo smiled. "Gentlemen, may I introduce my partner?" Sophia walked in. She wore a tailored white suit that seemed to glow in the dim light. She wore no jewelry except for a single, heavy gold ring, her father's ring. "This is Sophia Rossi," Lorenzo said. The name hit the table like a gavel. Sophia walked to the empty chair next to Lorenzo. "Signori," she addressed them, her voice commanding. "My father respected this table. I intend to do the same. But know this, the Moretti and Rossi families are now one." She looked at each of them. She didn't flinch. "Russo underestimated us because he looked at a waitress and saw a servant. Do not make the same mistake." Frank looked at Lorenzo, then at Sophia. He saw the way they stood together, a united front, a dynasty. Frank nodded slowly and raised his espresso cup. "Alla familia." 6 months later. The new restaurant was called L'Eredità, the legacy. It was grander than the old place. On opening night, the room was filled with politicians and power players. Sophia stood on the balcony, watching the floor. She saw a young waitress drop a fork, terrifyingly flustered. Sophia moved down the stairs, cutting through the crowd. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Rossi," the girl stammered. "Please don't fire me." Sophia picked up the fork and smiled, a genuine warm smile. "Breathe," she said. "I used to work this station. Table 4 is a nightmare, isn't it?" The girl blinked. "You did?" "I did, and I dropped a lot more than a fork." Sophia squeezed her shoulder. "Walk like you own the place, and eventually you will." Sophia turned to leave and found Lorenzo waiting by the bar with 2 glasses of Barolo. "You're soft," he teased, handing her a glass. "I'm efficient," she corrected. "Fear makes people clumsy. Respect makes them loyal." Lorenzo looked out over the empire they had built. Then he looked at her. "Do you miss it? Being invisible? The simple life?" Sophia looked at the front door. She thought about the fear, the hiding, the loneliness of being Sophie Miller. Then she looked at Lorenzo, the wolf who had given her a throne. "No," she said. She leaned in, whispering in his ear in the Sicilian dialect one last time. "Io sogno a casa, Enzo. Finalmente, sogno a casa. I am home, Enzo. Finally, I am home." Lorenzo smiled, the rare, genuine smile only she ever saw. He took her hand, and together they turned to face the room. The King and Queen of New York, and God help anyone who forgot to bring them the bread. So, from a waitress wiping tables to the queen of the New York underworld, Sophia Rossi proved that you should never judge a book by its cover, or a woman by her apron. She didn't just survive the Shark Tank. She became the shark. It makes you wonder, how many people do we pass on the street every day who are hiding a secret power, just waiting for the right moment to reveal it? If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and mafia justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next dramatic story. What would you have done in Sophia's shoes? Would you have saved Lorenzo or left him to the wolves? Let me know in the comments below.